22 German armored divisions remained paralyzed. More than 150,000 soldiers of the Third Reich, the equivalent of the entire population of a European city, were left waiting for an enemy that would never arrive. While the beaches of Normandy were soaked in Allied blood, the most feared army in the world waited for ghosts. And the architect of this paralysis was not a decorated general. He was not a strategist trained in military academies. He was a Spanish chicken farmer who had never fired a single bullet in combat. Juan Pujol Garcia built 27 spies, 27 complete personalities, with life stories, vices, political leanings, and verifiable addresses. An Indian poet in Brighton, a Swiss businesswoman who reported on orgies in Liverpool, a Gibraltarian waiter who hated Americans, a leader of Welsh fascists called Brothers of the Aryan World Order. None of them existed, and the Germans paid $340,000, the equivalent of millions today, to keep this army of shadows running. They trusted this man so much that they stopped sending other spies to England. Why risk real agents when they already had the best informant on the continent? The problem is that this informant worked for the other side. The most disturbing part? He started alone, without support, without training, rejected 3 times by the British he tried to help. So he decided that, to be useful to the Allies, he would first need to become indispensable to the Nazis. And it worked. This is the file of a man who was decorated by Hitler and by the King of England. A ghost who faked his own death for 36 years. A professional liar who wept over soldiers' graves saying he had not done enough. Barcelona, 1912. Juan Pujol Garcia was born on February 14th, ironically Valentine's Day, in a family that carried 2 Spains within itself. His father was a liberal businessman, owner of a dye factory, who believed in individual freedom above all else. His mother came from a rigid Catholic lineage from Andalusia, where discipline was more important than affection. This duality shaped him. Pujol grew up distrusting any authority that demanded blind obedience. He passed through schools run by monks. He was sent to boarding schools. He ended up studying something no one would expect from a future spy: poultry farming, the raising of chickens. Nothing in his youth suggested what he would become. Then came the Spanish Civil War. 1936, Spain split in half. On one side, the Republicans supported by the Soviet Union. On the other, the nationalists of Francisco Franco, supported by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. It was impossible to remain neutral, and Pujol was drafted. First, he fought for the Republicans. It lasted little. He witnessed the economic disorganization on the communist side. He saw his own sister being detained by control patrols. He observed how the system treated ordinary families as suspects until they proved their loyalty. He developed a visceral repulsion for that model, so he fled. He was briefly imprisoned. He managed to desert. He crossed to the other side, Franco's nationalists, and discovered that fascism was equally repulsive. Arbitrary orders, summary executions, a colonel who sent him to prison out of pure personal dislike. Pujol emerged from the Civil War with a unique distinction. He had served on both sides of the conflict without ever having fired a single bullet for any cause. Not out of cowardice, out of conviction. He did not believe in either of them. And this experience, this laboratory of survival amidst radical ideologies, taught him something that would be fundamental for his future mission: the art of social camouflage. How to seem loyal without being so. How to say what others want to hear. How to exist in a system without belonging to it. When the Second World War began in 1939, Pujol was in Madrid. He worked in a hotel. He watched the newspapers. And he came to a conclusion that would change history. Nazism was the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. He decided he needed to do something. He had no military training. He had no political connections. He had nothing but an unshakable conviction that he needed to contribute to Hitler's defeat. In 1941, Juan Pujol Garcia went to the British Embassy in Madrid. He offered his services as a spy. He was rejected. The British thought he was too insignificant, or worse, a possible agent provocateur. He tried again in Lisbon. Rejected. He tried a third time. Rejected. 3 refusals. Any normal person would have given up. But Pujol was not a normal person. He was a man who had survived 2 dictatorships by feigning loyalty to both. And then he had an idea. An absurd idea, dangerous, completely insane. If the British didn't want him as an ally, he would become so valuable that they would have no choice. To be useful to the Allies, first he would need to become indispensable to the Nazis. He would infiltrate German intelligence, alone, without support, without a safety net, and that was exactly what he did. The Abwehr, the German military intelligence service, had offices in Madrid. Pujol walked in through the front door. He presented himself as a Spanish government official with diplomatic access and a fanatical devotion to the Nazi cause. He had studied fascist rhetoric for months. He knew exactly what to say, what tone to use, which words to choose. His initial handler was a man named Friedrich Knapperate, codenamed Frederico, a German officer who was impressed by the ideological enthusiasm of that eloquent Spaniard. Frederico took the bait. Pujol received basic training in secret writing, how to use invisible ink, how to encode messages. He also received a substantial amount of money, and he received a mission, travel to England, establish himself on British soil, recruit a network of spies. He accepted everything and never went to England. Instead, Pujol moved to Lisbon, Portugal. He rented a room and started writing. From a copy of the Blue Guide to Great Britain, a common tourist book, train schedules, English newspapers bought at newsstands, and newsreels watched in local cinemas, he began sending detailed reports to the Germans simulating his presence on British soil. Reports that described troop movements, ship positions, conversations overheard in pubs, all invented. But the details were so rich. The exact cost of train tickets, precise geographical descriptions, extracted from tourist guides, opening hours of establishments, that the Abwehr accepted everything without question. And then Pujol took a step further. He began inventing agents. If he was supposedly in England, he needed helpers, informants, a network. So he created a Portuguese-Brazilian businessman in Liverpool who monitored convoys in the Atlantic, an employee at the Ministry of Information who leaked rumors about British morale, a Gibraltarian waiter with anti-American sentiments. 27 fictional agents in total, each with a life story, each with their own motivations, each with a different writing style, because Pujol knew the Germans would analyze linguistic patterns. There was Stanley, leader of a group of Welsh fascists called Brothers of the Aryan World Order. There was Rags, an Indian poet stationed in Brighton who sent artistic observations that hid military information. There was Mrs. Gerbers, a Swiss businesswoman who reported on orgies and moral decay in Liverpool. Exactly the kind of thing the Nazis expected to hear about the British. Pujol fed German prejudices, and they devoured every lie. But he made mistakes. In a famous message, he reported meeting men in Glasgow who would do anything for a liter of wine. The problem? The UK used the imperial system. Pints, not liters. And the Scottish working class preferred beer or whiskey. Wine was for the elite, an obvious mistake, which the Germans didn't notice because they didn't know British culture either. Meanwhile, at Bletchley Park, the British decoding center that operated the Ultra system, analysts began intercepting German messages about an incredibly productive agent operating on English soil, a spy named Alaric who was providing valuable information. MI5 panicked. There was a Nazi infiltrator in England, and they couldn't find him. They hunted for months. They found no one, because there was no one to find. Nazi Germany's most valuable spy was sitting in a hotel room in Lisbon, inventing everything from tourist guides. The revelation came through Araceli Gonzalez, Pujol's wife. Desperate with the precarious situation in which they lived, she contacted the American naval attaché in Lisbon. And finally, the British understood what was happening. That infiltrator was not an enemy. He was an ally they had rejected 3 times. In April 1942, Juan Pujol Garcia was taken to London. He received the codename Garbo, a reference to the actress Greta Garbo for his extraordinary acting ability, and was integrated into the 20 Committee, the organization responsible for the double cross system. The goal of double cross was simple: capture all German agents in the UK and turn them into sources of disinformation. Pujol didn't need to be captured. He was already on the right side. His assigned partner was Thomas Harris, an MI5 officer of Anglo-Spanish heritage. The chemistry between the two was instant. Harris had an artistic background. He understood narrative. He understood characters. Together, they transformed Pujol's fictional network into a masterpiece of applied fiction. They spent hours developing the personalities of each sub-agent, creating backstories, inventing internal conflicts. When an agent needed to die, they planted fake obituaries in local newspapers to be intercepted by German intelligence. The Nazis never suspected. On the contrary, they trusted Alaric so much that they stopped sending other spies to England. Why risk it when they already had the best network on the continent? It is estimated that the Third Reich paid about $340,000 to keep Garbo's Ghost Army running, the equivalent of millions in current value. Money that was used by MI5 to fund the very operation against them. But there was a problem. Araceli, Pujol's wife, was destroyed. She lived in a house in North London with 2 small children. She was forbidden from socializing with the Spanish community for security reasons. She detested the British war rationing food. Too much pasta and too little fish, she complained. In 1943, she reached her limit. She threatened to go to the Spanish embassy. She threatened to reveal everything. She threatened to destroy the entire operation if she couldn't go back home with her children. This put at risk not only Pujol's life, it put at risk all Allied planning for D-Day. The solution was cruel. Harris and Pujol staged a fake arrest. They convinced Araceli that her husband had been detained by MI5 as a direct result of her threats. They took her to the Camp 020 detention center, where she saw Pujol in a deplorable state, supposedly awaiting execution. She signed a statement swearing never again to endanger his work, and never knew it was all a lie. The greatest spy of the war had deceived his own wife to save the world. (1944). The Allies were planning the largest military invasion in history. More than 150,000 soldiers would cross the English Channel to liberate Europe. Enough ships to cover an area the size of 200 soccer fields. Planes in such quantity that they would darken the sky for hours. But there was a problem. The Germans knew the invasion was coming. The only question was where. The French coast had hundreds of kilometers of possible beaches. The German High Command believed the attack would come through the Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the channel, only 35 kilometers from England. It was the shortest path, the most logical one. The Allies chose Normandy, further away, harder, but less defended. The problem was convincing the Germans they were wrong without revealing they were right. Enter Operation Fortitude. The goal was to create a fictional army so convincing that Hitler would keep his best troops in the Pas-de-Calais even after the invasion began in Normandy. And the man in charge of selling this lie was Juan Pujol Garcia. Garbo informed the Germans about FUSAG, the first United States Army group, 11 full divisions, tanks enough to crush any resistance, and led by none other than General George S. Patton, the commander most feared by the Nazis. FUSAG was completely fictional, but Garbo described it in such detail. Troop movements, camp positions, conversations picked up by his agents, that the Germans believed they were facing the main Allied force. Between January and June of 1944, Pujol sent over 500 radio messages. Some nights there were more than 20 transmissions, each one reinforcing the existence of an army that never set foot on any soil. Then came the day, June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Allies authorized Garbo to send a message informing that the landing in Normandy was beginning. The idea was to maintain his credibility. He would be the first to report, proving his agents were reliable. But the message would arrive too late for the Germans to react. The plan was perfect. Except for one detail. The German operator in Madrid was not listening at 3 in the morning. The scheduled time. Silence. Pujol only managed to transmit the message at 8 in the morning when the first waves of soldiers were already dying on the beaches. The information arrived too late. Any normal spy would have panicked. Garbo saw an opportunity. He sent a furious message to the Abwehr. He expressed his absolute disgust at the incompetence and laziness of the German operator who had ignored a vital alert. He demanded explanations. He threatened to reconsider his collaboration. The Germans apologized, formally. They praised his reports as magnificent and promised it would never happen again. But the decisive blow came 3 days later, June 9, 1944. Garbo sent a long report detailing that, despite the strength of the landing in Normandy, the best Allied divisions had not yet been mobilized. Patton's Fusag remained intact in southeast England, ready to attack the true objective, Pas-de-Calais. Normandy was just a diversion. The report was taken directly to Adolf Hitler, and Hitler believed it. The Führer personally ordered the German 15th Army to remain stationed in northern France to repel the real invasion that would never come. 22 divisions, the equivalent of over 150,000 soldiers, a combined weight greater than 5,000 adult elephants in military equipment, panzer tanks, heavy artillery, the best armored units of the Reich, all paralyzed for weeks. While the Allies fought to expand their position in Normandy, the German forces that could have crushed them were waiting for ghosts 300 kilometers away. When they finally realized the truth, it was too late. The beachhead was established. The liberation of Europe had begun. On July 29, 1944, Juan Pujol Garcia received the Iron Cross Second Class from the Third Reich. The decoration was personally authorized by Adolf Hitler for his extraordinary services to the Nazi cause. Months later, he received the Order of the British Empire from King George VI, the only man in history to be decorated by both sides of a world war. But the war ended, and Garbo became a problem. Remaining Nazi networks could discover his betrayal. Surviving German agents might want revenge. MI5 decided the safest solution was to make Juan Pujol Garcia disappear. In 1949, news circulated that he had died of malaria in Angola. Some sources said Mozambique, others mentioned a snakebite. His first wife and children in Spain mourned his death. Meanwhile, Pujol was alive in Venezuela, with a new name, a new life, a new family. He married again, had 3 more children, worked as an English teacher for oil company employees, then opened a stationery store called La Casa del Regalo in Caracas. 35 years of silence, until a British historian named Nigel West began investigating the files. He followed clues. He refused to accept that Garbo had died in Africa. In 1984, West found Juan Pujol Garcia in Caracas, alive, selling notebooks. The revelation was a global shock. The children from his first marriage discovered that the father they believed dead for decades had been alive all along. Pujol returned to London. He was received by former colleagues from MI5. He signed the guest book at Buckingham Palace. He was treated like the hero he was, and then he went to Normandy. 40 years after the landing, he walked among the white headstones of the American cemetery. Thousands of them, rows that stretched as far as the eye could see, each representing a young man who never returned home. American and British veterans recognized him. They thanked him. They said they owed their lives to his work. Garbo was seen weeping among the graves, murmuring words that few heard. "I didn't do enough." Juan Pujol Garcia died in Caracas in 1988. He was 76 years old. He suffered a stroke. He was buried in Choroní, a coastal town in Venezuela, where he lived his last years as the owner of a stationery store called La Casa del Regalo. His neighbors knew him as a quiet shopkeeper, a gentle man who gave English lessons to oil company employees. None of them knew they were buying notebooks from a ghost. The question that remains is not how he fooled the Nazis. It is more disturbing than that. The question is, who was Juan Pujol Garcia when he wasn't playing anyone? He was a Republican soldier, then a nationalist, then a convinced Nazi for the Germans, then a British hero, then dead in Angola, then a Venezuelan shopkeeper with a new family who knew nothing. How many masks can a man wear before forgetting which was the original face? When he visited the cemeteries of Normandy in 1984, 40 years after the landing, he was seen weeping among the white headstones, murmuring that he had not done enough. Perhaps that was the only truth he couldn't fake.